people that I admire most in the whole world are my parents, Gladys and Matthew Friedman. I just have a tremendous admiration for them. They're people who are role models for me in terms of their idealism, in terms of their passion for what they do. My parents are quite a few years past retirement age, but they are not stopping their work. They are just, my mom's a psychiatrist and my dad works in cancer research. And they are just keeping on going, and because they love what they do and whatever. So my parents are really, also they're very ethical people, very, very honest people, very, really amazing human beings. And one of the ways in which my parents have been role models for me is that my parents are really, really not materialistic people. When I was growing up, so my parents sent me to a private school. So most of my classmates, so they were coming to school, their parents would drive them to school, let's say in a Volvo or in BMWs. And the kids were dressed in the sort of standard upper middle class, sort of fancy kind of way. And there I was, Jenny Friedman, coming to school. My parents, I would come to school on the bus, or my parents had sort of a not so expensive American car, and my parents would get us clothing every year at Sears. And that was sort of that was sort of a less lower material, more simple standard of way of doing things. I think at the time, being a kid, going to sort of this prep school, a private school, being the child of not materialistic parents is sometimes as a child, sometimes it wasn't so easy. But as I grew older, going to high school, and certainly now, I really, really value that I was raised that way. And a way that really values the world of the spirit and the mind above above the fancy clothing and the fancy cars and all that other stuff. So I in my own way I've sort of continued following in my parents' path in that way. It's very, very natural to me not to be materialistic. And certainly it's much easier not to be materialistic living in Israel and trying to get by on Israeli salaries. It's much easier not to be materialistic here. So I've continued sort of following in my parents' path in that way. So with my kids, I try to also I also try pretty naturally to me. I try not to spend so much money. I try to get them nice clothing without spending much money on it. So, for example, I get a lot of clothing for them from gamachim, from lending societies, or I get clothing for them hand-me-downs from friends. Or my mother-in-law, she loves going to the yard sales and second-hand stores in Canada, where she's from. So we get a lot of second-hand clothing from her, very high quality. And sometimes I buy if I really want to splurge and spend I'm feeling a really big spender, really want to get my kids some fancy clothing. Then I go to a place called Bazaar Strauss, which is sort of the Israeli or the Jerusalem equivalent, let's say, of Target or Sears or something like that, sort of like a discount clothing store. So the other day, I had to attend a parent-teacher meeting at my daughter's school. Daughters plural, I have 3 daughters in the same school. So one of my daughters, I go in to speak with my daughter's teacher. She's a very lovely person, and she's a person who's very she says what's on her mind. And she said, I just want to tell you first of all, she said, you have a wonderful daughter, and she's doing great in school, and she's a great girl, and she's just a wonderful kid. Thank you so. And I was like, thank you so much for that. So I thought I was getting off, with nothing negative to say about my daughter. But then she said, but there is something that I want to tell you. She said, please don't take this the wrong way. I really don't want to hurt your feelings. But, can you tell me, where do you get your daughter's clothing? And all of a sudden I can, feel my face turning hot. Because I'm like, oh no, have I done something wrong? So I said, we get so I didn't tell her about the lending societies. I thought that would sound too terrible. But I said, we get hand-me-downs, and my mother-in-law gets a second-hand clothing in Canada, and we also get clothing at Bazaar Strauss, which is that discount store. And so I said Bazaar Strauss. The truth is I really don't get very much clothing there, but I sort of said that as though to sound oh, I do spend money on my children's clothing. But when I told her, in her eyes, when I told this teacher, when I told her like bizarre styles, like her face just like fell. And as though like this was like the worst place that I could possibly like, I don't, so this was like the worst possible place I could ever buy my children clothing. And she said, you know, she said, Mrs. Weisberg, she said, you know, because I just have to tell you, she says, I've noticed, and now I understand why, according to like, in accordance with like what you've told me, that your daughter, she does not dress like the other girls in the class. She doesn't dress in the same sort of style as them. And you know, I'm worried I'm worried that, you know, kids this age, they're very superficial, and I'm worried that if your wonderful daughter that she keeps on dressing like a chnuna. Chnuna is a word in Hebrew, I believe. I think it means geek. If you're Israeli and you know what the word chnuna means, then actually email me. I think it means geek. She says your daughter dresses like a chnuna. She says, I'm so sorry to have to tell you, she dresses like, a bit like a chnuna. And you know, and kids at age are very superficial. I really, I so love your daughter. She says, I so wouldn't want her to be hurt socially by the fact that she's dressing like a chnuna. Okay, so so basically, I left there and I felt so bad. I felt so terrible because I so remembered what it was like growing up and attending like a private school where all the kids were like, you know, dressing in all this beautiful, fancy, like expensive clothing, and I was the one dressed like a chnuna, like a geek, dressed like, you know, not very nicely with clothing from Sears and, you know, things where, and I felt so guilty. I felt so bad. And then I spoke with my Israeli friend, and she's like, oh, and she personally, she's a person who like she like values like dressing nicely, and her kids are dressed very nicely, and she like spends a lot of money on clothing. And so when I told her this, she said, oh no, she says, has your daughter, like, has she, you know, been hurt socially by this? And like, I just felt so bad. I just felt like my friend was confirming what the teacher said, and this is just so terrible. My daughter will never, like, how could I have done this? How could I have done this to my daughter? Like sending my daughter, you know, not spending enough clothing, not spending enough money on her clothing, and sending her to school looking like a chnuna, and oh my God, what have I done? Feeling so guilty. So basically, you know, the next morning after the parent-teacher meeting, I woke up in the morning, you know, with that sinking feeling in my stomach, like you wake up with, like when you know, like something's terrible has happened. So I just felt so bad, and all of the day I was just like, oh no, I spoke with my husband about it, and what am I gonna do? And then feeling so guilty. Okay, so about 24 hours after the parent-teacher meeting had actually taken place, like about like, you know, the following evening, I had a bit of a revelation. I was like, you know what? This really isn't so terrible. You know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, like, you know, we're going to budget this month. We're going to budget a few extra 100 shekels for my daughter to go and buy some nice new clothing. So that was what I did. I told my daughter, I said, I didn't tell her what the teacher had said because I know that would like make her feel really, really uncomfortable. So I said to my daughter, I said, you know, so-and-so, dear daughter, I'm going to give you some money to buy some great new clothing for the summer, and I want you can go to this store or this store, not Bizarre Strauss, okay? You can go to this store, which is like in the style of the girls from her class, or this store, it's style from girls from her class, and my daughter's really happy. I sent her with her sister, and they went on their own, and she came home, and today, I'm telling you, my daughter went to school like the best. I'm sure she was the best dressed girl in her class. She looked beautiful. And so I'm telling you all of this story, this sort of silly story, because I think that this is like, it's such a typical story in a way. Like we experience guilt so frequently, but I think that there's two ways to react to guilt. Okay, so I think like sort of the natural way to respond to guilt is like you respond to it like it's like a swamp. It's like quicksand. Okay, it's like guilt as quicksand. So like before you know it, like you're feeling like, oh my God, I'm the worst. So let's say like, you know, this is the whole story with my daughter. Or let's say that you're in a bad mood, your kid drove you crazy today, and like you gave him a big hit. Okay, you hit your child. Or let's say like you've just been like a big grouch and yelling at your kids the whole day. Or like whatever you've done wrong, and then you're just like bogged down like this quicksand of guilt, like, oh my God, I'm the worst. I am the worst. I'm the worst mother. I'm the worst wife. I'm the worst human being. You know, the problem with getting stuck down, like getting bogged down in this quicksand of guilt, is that then like you stay there. Like I think that there are mothers who are stuck in that quicksand of guilt, you know, for days at a time, for weeks at a time, for God forbid, for years at a time, for lifetimes at a time. You could stay stuck in that quicksand of guilt like for your whole life. And you know, like if you let yourself get all depressed about it, and like I'm the worst, and like the terrible thing about letting guilt be like quicksand, like I did for those 24 hours when I was feeling guilty about my daughter not buying her nice enough clothing, is that then like the bad behavior, like this behavior which you feel so bad about, it just continues because you're like well, you know, I hit my child, and I really, you know, and so I'm the worst mother, and so I'm just gonna hit them again. I'm gonna hit them again. Okay, because you're stuck there. You're stuck in this guilty, quicksandy kind of place. Okay, so what should guilt really be? Guilt should be a springboard. You know, like gymnasts, like before they get to like the vault, they like bounce on that springboard. You should be like, guilt should be that for you. Because guilt, most of the time, is like a sign there's something that you want to change. It's a sign that there's something inside you, something in your behavior, something in what you've been doing that you want to change. And the truth is, guilt can be a good thing in that way. It can be something that sort of pinpoints for you, that highlights for you what you want to change about yourself and what you want to change about what you're doing. So basically, like when next time you feel guilty, like when we feel guilty, the thing to do is not to get into this whole like self-flagellation, like I'm the worst mother, and I'm the worst wife, and I'm the worst human being, and there's no hope for me, and I'm just the worst. No, okay, you can stay there. I permit you to stay there for 5 minutes. Okay, you can stay there for 5 minutes. But then what you're supposed to do is guilt should be a springboard. And how to use that springboard is you ask yourself, okay, that happened, and I feel terrible, and this is awful. What am I gonna do now? What am I gonna do about it? I'm feeling terrible, I'm the worst mother, and the worst this, and the worst that, and my kid is like, just like a chanuna. Okay, what am I going to do about it? Okay? So obviously, like in my story, this springboard was, you know, like guilt was the springboard, and okay, now what am I going to do with it? Was to actually like budget some money so my daughter could actually go to school dressed like the others, sort of dressed like basically like on the same standard as the other girls in her class, so that, and I think like it actually worked. So I want to bless all of you, and please bless me too. I want to bless all of us Jewish moms that next time you're feeling guilty, okay, or if you're feeling guilty now, that God forbid that you don't let guilt become a quicksand for you so that you're stuck in this way of feeling. That God willing, that guilt should be for you, that actually should be a good thing. That guilt should be a springboard. So you touch on the guilt for a few, I let you for 5 minutes. And then you say, okay, so now what am I going to do about it? Okay? So, I want to bless all of you. You should be able to use your guilt, not as quicksand, but it should be a springboard for you to self-change and becoming really, really, really the person and the mom that you want to be. And I want to bless all of you with an amazing, amazing week.